I'm Allison. That morning, while making coffee in my small kitchen in a northern suburb of Chicago, I opened my email as usual. Amidst a flood of promotions and work reports, one subject line made me freeze. About the wedding from Holly. I clicked. Just one short paragraph. Please don't come, we're keeping the ceremony small so we'll live stream it. Here's the link, hope you understand. No invitation, no apology, not even a thank you. Just a cold hyperlink. I stood still holding the coffee spoon, feeling like someone had punched me square in the chest. Me, the person who had wired nearly $63,000 over the last 6 months to fund my sister's wedding, was being treated like a nameless outsider. Wasn't I the one who paid the deposit for the boutique hotel on Michigan Avenue? Wasn't I the one who ordered all the embroidered table linens, hired the premium videography team, and covered the fees for 3 different dress fittings? And yet, not a single printed invitation. I double-checked. No previous emails, no missed calls, no texts. Just one command, don't come. I leaned against the fridge, feeling my chest tighten, inch by inch. The coffee steam rose gently, brushing against my cheek as if to ask, "Are you okay?" I wasn't. My mom, Diana, was the only one in the family who ever called me when something major needed to get done. Lately, she had been asking me repeatedly to send more money to help take the stress off Holly. I had even paid for the engagement brunch. Over $7,800, including the garden rental and cocktail service team. I didn't regret the money, but in that moment, I regretted myself. I turned back to my laptop and opened the spreadsheet. Total, $62,740. All charged to my credit card. My name on every invoice. And in return? A livestream link, and an invitation to stay quiet. At that moment, I told myself maybe Holly was just overwhelmed. Maybe she didn't realize she had just pushed aside the very sister who had stood by her since her divorce at 24. All the way to meeting Nolan. I called, no one picked up. 30 minutes later, a message popped up from my mother. Holly needs some space. Don't make this a big deal. Everything's fine if you don't overreact. Overreact? Being told I was 3 weeks of unpaid leave just to help plan this wedding? Being told I was too sensitive for being kicked out like a late-paying customer? I didn't reply. I simply stood up, stepped out onto the balcony, and watched a sheet of dull clouds glide silently across the city skyline. Outside, Chicago buzzed as usual. But inside me, there was a stillness I hadn't known before. A stillness that wasn't peace, but the sound of something finally breaking. I used to believe that if I just kept giving, eventually I'd be recognized. But it turns out, when you give enough, people stop seeing it as kindness and start expecting it as obligation. And that morning, in a 7-line email, my sister made one thing clearer than ever. You're not necessary. I stood there for a long time before going back in and printing out every invoice, one by one. If they saw me as a walking wallet, then the least I could do was keep the receipts. That afternoon, I decided to drive to the tasting at Celestine Grove, the restaurant where Holly and Nolan's wedding reception would be held. Despite the cold email treatment, I still wanted to check things one last time before the final $7,200 payment went through. I told myself that if I was paying, the food shouldn't be terrible. The restaurant sat on the 3rd floor of a glass building in the Gold Coast, with a view overlooking Lake Michigan. Exactly the kind of place my mother would call elegant, but not showy. I arrived 20 minutes early, but as soon as I walked in, the manager, a young woman named Lexi, gave me a visibly uncomfortable look. "Are you Allison? I'm sorry, but Holly requested that this tasting be limited to people directly in the wedding party." I froze. "Can you double-check that, please?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "I'm the one who paid for the entire reception package." Lexi glanced at her iPad. "I understand, but the list today only includes the bride, groom, bride's mother, maid of honor, and the event coordinator. Lydia. Lydia. The woman who always treated me like staff rather than the one footing the bill. Last time, when I gave input on the photo backdrop, she patted my shoulder and smiled. Don't worry, we've got it covered. You should focus on enjoying the moment, like a guest of honor maybe. Guest of honor? No name on the invitation, no part in the planning team, not a single decent photo. And yet, I'm a guest of honor? I turned and walked away without saying another word. As I passed the mirror in the lobby, I caught my reflection. Neat button-up, hair tied back, eyes still clinging to the hope that something might change. I looked at myself and saw someone. A few days later, I received an email from the wedding planner company, a final summary along with a link to the concept photo album from last weekend's shoot at a farm outside Naperville. I had paid nearly $3,500 for that shoot, including props and a stylist. I opened the album. 46 photos. I appeared in exactly one, standing next to the lemonade barrel, half my face cropped out, blurry like a background volunteer. The caption read, "So grateful to everyone who helped create this perfect afternoon." I read through every comment below. Stunning, Holly looks amazing. The bride's mom is so elegant. Love the bridal party, they nailed it. No one mentioned me. No one tagged me. I scrolled to the bottom. In the special thanks section, printed in pastel pink. Thank you to the bride's mother, Mrs. Diana, for your tireless support. Thank you to Lydia and the Sabon events team for crafting every detail. Thank you to Nolan, the incredible partner by Holly's side. I read it 3 times. My name wasn't there. That evening, I attended a pre-wedding gathering at the Harris residence, Nolan's parents' house. It was a cozy southern-sided dinner, white wine flowing non-stop. I got a late invitation from one of Holly's friends, along with a note. Just come for fun. Holly said you were probably busy, so didn't bother you with details. I found my name at table 8, near the restroom. Specifically, wedged between a hallway leading to the supply closet and the emergency exit. The smell of disinfectant was so strong I had to lightly stuff a napkin near my nose. Next to me sat a distant relative of Nolan's I had never met, texting non-stop and referring to me as some cousin from the bride's side or whatever. I stifled a laugh, not because it was funny, but because if I didn't laugh I might cry. As the toast began, I looked across the room. Holly posed with Lydia under a glowing flower arch. My mother beamed beside Nolan. No one glanced in my direction. No one wondered why I was seated in the darkest corner of the room, next to a mop bucket and a mini vacuum. And that's when I realized they hadn't forgotten me. They had put me exactly where they thought I belonged. Behind the scenes. Not worthy of recognition, just barely enough to be used. I set my glass down, stood, and left the table. No one looked back, no one stopped me. I stepped out the front door into the crisp May air of Chicago. I wasn't angry, just hollow. A quiet kind of emptiness growing inside me like the dim banquet room I once thought I was part of. The next morning, I woke up feeling like I had just fallen out of the wrong dream. Everything in the apartment was still in place. The armchair by the window, the photo of my father hanging over the fireplace, the books neatly stacked on the shelf. But I wasn't intact anymore. The first thing I did was make an espresso. Strong, dark, no sugar. Then I reopened Holly's email and read those bland lines again. Like I needed to hurt myself into believing they were real. By then, I no longer felt hurt. I felt light. The kind of light that comes when someone finally drops the overloaded backpack they've been carrying for years. I texted Noreen, my best friend from college, the only person who ever knew me better than my own mother, and invited her for tea at the small shop near the public library. Noreen was the type who never asked, "What's wrong?" over text. She just sent a teacup emoji with 30 minutes. When I arrived, she was already seated in our usual corner, earth-toned beanie pulled low, steam rising from her Earl Grey. I sat down without needing to say a word. "You holding up?" she asked, eyes still on the tea stain circling her cup. "Listen," I shook my head. "I don't know, it feels like everything just collapsed, but somehow it's eerily quiet." Noreen studied me for a moment, then she said, almost in a whisper, "Allison, there's something I wasn't going to tell you, but now I think you should know." I stayed silent. "Last week, I ran into Lydia at a wedding planner networking event." I didn't react. Holly was there too. They were chatting with a group near the bar. And Holly, she laughed out loud and said, and I quote, "As long as my sister keeps paying on time, everything will keep looking perfect like this." It felt like all the air had been pulled from my lungs. Noreen gave me a sympathetic look. I wasn't far away. She wasn't joking. She said it like she was talking about a platinum credit card. I let out a laugh. Not loud, not bitter, just the kind of laugh people make when they realize they've been a fool for a decade. I thought of all the vacations I canceled to attend planning meetings. The nights I stayed up until 2 a.m. reviewing spreadsheets to make sure my sister had everything she wanted. The things I never bought for myself so I could fund her purple rose fantasy wedding she couldn't live without. I had always believed that if I just kept being kind, kept giving, I'd be loved in return. But now it was clear. To Holly, I wasn't a sister. I was a reliable financial stream. Noreen placed a hand on my shoulder. "You deserve better, you know that, right?" I nodded, though part of me still wanted to argue. That part whispered, "But they're family." Maybe Holly didn't mean it. Mom will be heartbroken if this blows up. I had defended them for too long. I had built my entire adult life on excuses for their behavior. I tightened my grip on my bag strap and stood. "Thank you, Noreen, for not letting me lie to myself any longer." On the way home, I didn't play music. I didn't make a call. I didn't check my phone. I let myself hear the sound of the cars, the wind cutting past the window, and another sound, clearer than the rest. The quiet return of my self-respect. That evening, I opened the folder labeled Holly Wedding, Finance. I reorganized every file, invoices, contracts, payment slips. Every word, every figure was proof I had been there. And when I scrolled to the line marked Final Payment, July 8, I didn't hesitate. Right-click. Select Cancel Payment. A confirmation box appeared. I clicked Yes. I didn't need to scream to let people know I was hurting. I just had to stop. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one keeping everything looking okay. And for the first time, I didn't feel guilty about that. 3 days after I canceled the final payment, a cream-colored envelope arrived in my mailbox. No return address, just embossed gold letters. Holly and Nolan's Wedding Program. July 15th, 1:30 p.m. I set it on the dining table and didn't open it right away. One question kept looping in my head. If I wasn't supposed to show up, why send me the program? It wasn't until that evening that I opened the envelope. A glossy booklet, thick cover, the kind of luxury design you'd see from a high-end resort catalog. The first page had a photo of Holly and Nolan under a lavender arch, arms wrapped around each other, staring into the camera with that diffused glow only designer wedding invitations can pull off. I turned to the second page. A heartfelt thank you to those who made this day possible. My mother, Diana, was listed first as the emotional anchor and source of unconditional love. The groom's family, the Harrises, were praised for their warm welcome and unwavering support. Lydia, the wedding planner, had her own dedicated paragraph. This day would not exist without her magic touch. I reached the final line of the acknowledgments. No mention of me, not a single line, not a hint or implication. I folded the page. My hands were dry but colder than usual. Not from surprise. From certainty finally confirmed. I stood up and made myself a cup of peppermint tea. On the shelf, the white porcelain mug that read, "Big Sister," a gift from Holly 6 years ago, still sat untouched. I placed it in a cardboard box and stored it on the highest shelf. That night, I got a message from a distant relative, cousin Eliza from my father's side. Someone I'd only seen at large family gatherings. Her text read, "Just saw your name on the wedding finance list. They took it down, but the old file is still floating. You really paid?" I replied, "Yes. Most of it." She sent back a smirking emoji. "They used a photo of you from the March fundraiser, the one where you're hugging Holly, said you were the amazing sister making everything possible. But now?" Crickets. I didn't respond. The image from that gala flashed in my head. I'd worn a simple navy dress, stood beside Holly as she held the mic and told the story of her journey of love. I'd smiled, nodded, clapped at the right times. In hindsight, I was the perfect supporting character. On cue, on mark, and now. Edit it out of the script. The next morning, I visited the wedding website I'd paid to build, hollyandnolan.com, and checked the About Us section. Under Bride's family, there were only photos of my mother and 2 aunts. My name was gone. Under Contributors, only a few sponsors from Nolan's side were listed, plus small businesses offering percentage-based wedding gifts. I scrolled to the bottom. Special thanks, now listed, only Lydia, the wedding planner, and Sabine Events. I clicked Contact Us. A chat box opened. "We're currently offline, please leave a message." I closed the tab. The worst part wasn't being rejected, it was being erased, like I had never existed. The wedding day approached. No one from my family called to ask if I was coming. No messages, no confirmations. My mother didn't ask. Holly stayed silent. Nolan, the man who once cried when I helped restore his family's trust after his bankruptcy 3 years ago, couldn't even send a reminder. I took a walk around Lincoln Park, bought a lemonade from the small kiosk under the oak tree. The woman who ran it, Carol, a 60-something widow, handed me the cup and said, "I've always admired how you come here, never in a rush, never needing attention, and still carry yourself like someone who knows she's worth it." I thanked her and walked away. That's when it hit me. I had lived too long in relationships where giving was expected, and recognition was a luxury. They didn't see me, not because I was invisible, but because they were used to me standing behind the lights. But not anymore. No more Sister Allison summoned only when a card needed swiping. No more anonymous benefactor in the background. I don't need them to acknowledge me. I just need to remind myself I was there, I gave, and I am enough, even when they pretend I never existed. That evening after leaving Lincoln Park, I came home, hung up my coat, and sat down at the desk where I'd once spent countless nights planning every last detail of Holly's wedding. My laptop screen was still glowing faintly. I opened the folder labeled Holly Wedding Contracts. The file sat there, neat and orderly, just like the way I'd lived. Responsible, punctual, never in anyone's way. At the bottom of the budget spreadsheet, one line stood out like a period at the end of a sentence. Final payment, $38,900, due July 10th. It was a scheduled auto transfer that covered fresh flowers, staff for the main event, and the final installment for lighting and stage design. I looked at the clock. 11:14 p.m. 46 minutes before the system would process the payment. I clicked, Cancel Scheduled Transfer. A confirmation box appeared. Cancel payment? This action cannot be undone. I didn't hesitate. I clicked Confirm. The screen flickered, then went still. No fireworks. No drama. Just one number, no longer about to be deducted. I closed the laptop, stood up, poured myself a glass of water and drank slowly, as if reclaiming my body after waking from a long, uneasy dream. The next morning, I went to the same old bank branch where I'd opened my first account at 23, right after starting my accounting job at a private equity firm in River North. Carlos, the branch manager, recognized me instantly. He stepped out from behind the main counter and shook my hand with a warm smile. Several times a day. As Allison, long time no see, heading out on another work trip? I shook my head. No. I'm here to cancel all scheduled payments related to the event on July 15th. Under the name Holly Patterson. He paused briefly, then nodded. I'll take you to a private meeting room. We sat in a glass room adjacent to the VIP client area. I pulled out a folder I had printed the night before. Each contract with the florist, lighting company, backdrop supplier, event coordinator, and beverage vendor. I laid everything on the table, each page placed precisely like evidence in an investigation. Carlos flipped through the documents, brows furrowing slightly. Are you sure you want to cancel everything? Some of these vendors will apply penalties for late cancellation. I understand, I said calmly. I'll take full responsibility for what I signed. But I'm not going to keep funding something I've been excluded from. Carlos didn't press further. He nodded and began filling out the forms. I'll need your signature here and here. If you prefer, we can contact the vendors on your behalf. I paused, then shook my head. No need. Let the failed transactions speak for themselves. They'll catch on quickly. Carlos looked at me, this time longer, as if seeing someone entirely different from the woman he remembered. To be honest, he said softly, you don't look like someone going through a crisis. I smiled slightly and held his gaze. It doesn't feel like a crisis anymore, just reclaiming my voice. When I signed the last page, Carlos gathered the documents into a sturdy folder and stamped them with confirmation. We'll process these today. If there's any pushback, I'll notify you. I stood, thanked him, and walked out without looking back. Outside, the Chicago sun had begun to rise higher, streaming through the glass and highlighting the fine layer of dust on the waiting room table. I stepped onto the street without needing sunglasses. Life moved on as usual, cars passing, people glued to their phones, the faint honk of a bus in the distance. But inside me, something had shifted permanently. They might think I ruined something special, that I sabotaged an important event. But to me, this was the first time I refused to be background scenery for a stage I wasn't invited to stand on. And I knew, whether anyone understood or not, this was the most right thing I had ever done for myself. The morning of July 15th began under a slate-gray sky, with clouds hanging low like a silent warning. I made coffee early, without an alarm. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. Everything was ready. On my terms. Across the city, at the Sinclair Hotel where Holly and Nolan's wedding was supposed to take place, the atmosphere was completely different. The decor team was scheduled to arrive at 6 a.m. to set up the floral arch, arrange silk chairs, and configure the lighting. But by 7:15, the wedding hall was still empty. The coordinator was making frantic calls. A confused receptionist flipped through a schedule printed with the wrong contact name. Lydia, the wedding planner, was visibly unraveling when the lighting company announced, "We haven't received final payment. Per contract, we cannot proceed." The florist, Dahlia Bloom & Co., emailed at 8:04 a.m. Due to a payment breach, Order 3321 has been automatically cancelled. My mother, Deanna, was fixing Holly's hair when she got a call from hotel staff. When she came downstairs and saw 4 lighting crates stacked awkwardly at the entrance, with a note that read, "Service will cease if payment is not received within 2 hours," she began to lose composure. By 8:40, Lydia called my phone. I didn't pick up. At 8:53, Holly called. Her name lit up on my screen. "Holly." I answered. "Allison speaking." Her voice came through sharp and panicked. "Allison, what's going on? They're saying you canceled the payments?" My voice stayed calm. "That's correct." "What?" "Why? This is my wedding. Are you trying to ruin it?" I stepped away from the table and walked onto the balcony, taking a deep breath. "No, Holly. I didn't cancel the wedding. I just stopped funding an illusion I was never invited to be part of." There was silence for 2 seconds. Then a loud crush. Probably someone dropping a box. "What the hell are you talking about?" Holly shouted. "This is my wedding. You already paid for everything, why pull out now?" I let out a quiet laugh. Precisely because I paid for everything, I have the right to stop. You didn't invite me. You didn't mention me. You erased me from this day. You can't delete my name from the program and still expect me to foot the bill. My mother grabbed the phone. "Allison, think this through. People are arriving. Family is waiting outside. You can't just walk away." "I'm not walking away," I cut her off, letting my voice rise for the first time. "I'm simply done being responsible for the absence of love in this family." Her voice faltered. "But what will people say? They'll blame me, blame Holly. And have spent years protecting everyone's image, except my own." Silence. I ended the call. 10 minutes later, Lydia called back. No anger, no pleading. Just professional composure. "Mrs. Allison, I understand this is a personal decision. But I just want to confirm. None of the remaining balances will be paid, correct?" "Correct," I replied. "And I have copies of every contract that outlines that." "I've read them," Lydia exhaled. "They're lucky you stayed within legal bounds." I hung up and flipped my phone face down on the table. At the Sinclair, Holly sat on the floor of the bridal suite, makeup smeared with tears. My mother blamed Lydia. Lydia blamed unresponsive finance parties. Nolan said nothing, turning away as Holly accused him of doing nothing. The floral arch was never assembled. The stage lights never came on. Vendors pulled out, one by one. It didn't collapse with a bang, just a perfectly coordinated absence. And I sat at home, quietly finishing the novel I had left on the shelf for weeks, next to a cup of slowly cooling coffee. No gloating, no thrill, just silence. The kind of silence you earn when for the first time in your life, you stop trying to be someone no one acknowledges, just to protect what no one values. That afternoon, as I rinsed my coffee mug and got ready for a walk around the lake near my house, my phone rang. A sudden Zoom call popped up from a contact named Mom, Family Emergency. Hesitated. But then I hit join. The screen filled with familiar faces in small squares. My mom, Holly, Nolan, Aunt Carol from Iowa, Uncle Paul, my mom's older brother, and even Great Uncle Rick, who only ever appeared at funerals. Before I could speak, my mom jumped in, her voice dripping with dramatics. "Allison, we need to talk right now. Everyone's really hurt. What you did, without warning, threw the whole family into chaos." "Chaos?" I raised an eyebrow. "I was cut out of the entire event. No invitation, no decent seat, not a single word of thanks. If today was chaotic, it was the result of choices you all made." Holly cut in, voice cold as stone. "You always make things complicated. You couldn't handle me having one day that wasn't about you. That's how you've always been. Competitive, jealous, selfish." I laughed, not loud, not bitter, just a dry, short sound. "Jealous?" I said. "You think I sweat? Skipped work and spent nearly $70,000 just to sit near the bathroom at your wedding because I was jealous?" Every square on the screen went dead silent. "You pulled away," Holly pressed. "No one pushed you out. If you hadn't made it all about you, this day would have been perfect. I've planned for this my entire life." "Exactly," I said, staring straight into the camera. "And you forgot the most basic rule of planning a wedding. Being grateful to the people who made it possible." "I didn't ruin your wedding. I just stopped being an ATM that doesn't ask for receipts." Carol shifted awkwardly. "Maybe she just didn't know how to show her gratitude properly." "Aunt Carol," I cut her off gently but firmly. "I was cropped out of every photo, removed from the helpers list, and seated next to the janitor's supply closet. That's not an accident. That's deliberate erasure." Uncle Rick chimed in with his thick southern drawl. This Allison girl's always been fiery. If you treat your own family like this, who's supposed to trust you? I looked him straight in the eye, unblinking. I'm not doing this to be trusted. I'm doing this to be respected. Nolan, who'd stayed silent this whole time, finally spoke up. We're blaming the wrong person. Holly could have handled this better, sure. But Allison, all this could have been resolved with a conversation. You didn't have to blow up the whole event. I stared at Nolan. If the only time I'm worth talking to is when my payments go through, then I'm sorry, this conversation is already too late. Holly slammed her hand on the table, her face flushed red. You'll regret this. The whole family will remember what you did today. I didn't flinch. I let a beat pass. Then I spoke, slow and clear. No one here asked if I was okay. No one asked why I disappeared from everything. But the moment my card stopped swiping, suddenly, you all remembered I exist. My mother, trying to salvage control, said one last time. You're the rational one, you have to know how much your actions damage this family's reputation. I smiled, for real this time, not mockingly, just free. I don't live to protect the reputation of a family that only remembers me when a bill is due. I hit leave meeting. The screen went black, leaving only my own reflection. Not trembling, not sorry. Just a woman who had finally learned that silence, when prolonged, becomes complicity. That Monday morning, just 3 days after Holly's chaotic wedding, I left Chicago. No announcements, no goodbyes. I left the apartment keys with the building manager and activated a mail forwarding service to a P.O. box in Denver I'd registered online. On the Southwest flight at 9:15 a.m., I sat next to a woman knitting a scarf for her first granddaughter. She asked if I was traveling for business or family. I smiled. I'm on a break. She didn't press. I appreciated the silence. I rented a small studio on the 3rd floor of a red brick building near Capitol Hill. A quiet neighborhood, but not so still that it felt isolating. The apartment barely fit a twin bed, a desk, and one chair facing a tiny balcony shaded by old maple trees. Each morning, I brewed coffee with a small press, toasted bread, and opened the windows wide to hear the unfamiliar comfort of a new city. Joggers' footsteps, bicycle tires whispering on asphalt. The distant voice of someone calling for a runaway dog. No one knew who I was, no one cared where I'd come from. I didn't need to explain why I was here, no one asked. And that was exactly what I needed. I worked remotely for a small investment fund, part of the accounting team, so no one minded when I stepped away from the office for a while. They just emailed, kindly. Take your time, Allison, as long as your weekly reports are in. I submitted on time. Every number correct. But I didn't go beyond that. I didn't check the group chats. I didn't respond to dinner invites. I let myself float in a space that was enough. Not too much, not too little. In the evenings, I walked through Cheeseman Park, sat on a bench under the hawthorn trees. I brought a thin book. Not to read, but to keep my hands busy. To stop myself from grabbing my phone, rereading old messages, or opening photos that made me question everything. I didn't need an apology. I didn't need Holly to call and admit she was wrong. I didn't need a long message from my mother saying things went too far. I just needed to not be used anymore. One Saturday afternoon, while sipping tea at a small cafe called La Rue, a haven for freelancers chatting and working, I got a text from an unknown number. I'm sorry. I never meant for things to get this bad. I was just under a lot of pressure. I know I hurt you. If you'd just talk to me once, I'll listen. I stared at the screen. No name. But I knew it was Holly. I didn't reply. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was just done letting myself be hurt. I turned off my phone. A breeze slipped through the window, lifting the edge of the thin scarf draped over my lap. Outside, a young couple laughed with their dog, tossing a frisbee as it leapt mid-air to catch it. They clapped like it was the best thing they'd ever seen. I wasn't jealous, I wasn't sad. I just watched them, like someone watching a stage, from the back row. And for the first time in years, I didn't try to step into the scene. After 19 days in Denver, I no longer jumped when my phone buzzed. I no longer hoped a message would fix the unfixable. At the airport, I sat watching the board scroll destinations: New York, Portland, Los Angeles, Austin. I wasn't flying back to Chicago. I wasn't going to anyone's home. I was returning to a place I'd forgotten. Myself. Not an escape. Not revenge. Just a decision. That from now on, I didn't need permission to exist in anyone's life. I didn't need to be accepted. I just needed to be left in peace. I returned to Chicago on a morning drizzled with soft rain. The kind that dampens the pavement but doesn't send people running. The city was still the same. Loud, rushed, indifferent. But I wasn't the same woman I was 3 weeks ago. I opened the door to my apartment, the same one I had left like I was fleeing something. Everything was in place. But it no longer felt temporary. I pulled the curtains, opened the window, and let the crisp air drift in. I made tea instead of coffee. I didn't need energy. I needed quiet. Over the past 3 weeks, I had a lot of time to think about all the years I spent keeping the peace. I used to think silence was a form of kindness, that not reacting showed maturity, that compromise was wisdom. But now, I understand. Silence, kept too long, is not grace. It's erosion. It's how you vanish in others' eyes, and then, in your own. I used to be the one who held things together, the bridge builder in every tension, the strong older sister who handled everything. I once texted Mom happy birthday on Holly's behalf. I booked Aunt Carol's flight, arranged hotel rooms for distant cousins, even paid Nolan's leftover DJ fee. Without anyone knowing. And all those years, I asked for nothing. Until my silence became expected. Until my absence wasn't noticed. Except when a bill was unpaid. I picked up my phone. 2 unheard voicemails, one from my mother, one from Holly. I didn't press play. I saved them into a separate folder, labeled, "Not Ready Yet." Because I didn't need to hear them, to know what they'd say. I didn't need more excuses. I didn't need another, "We were just trying to keep things light for the family." I didn't need a lukewarm apology after 3 weeks of prideful silence. And I didn't need revenge. I just needed to stop paying the price for the role they assigned me. The strong one, the stable one. The one who never needed to be asked if she was okay. That afternoon I walked to the park near my apartment. The same one I used to visit after work with a book in hand. The breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass and the laughter of children, playing in the distance. I sat on a bench, holding a cup of hot tea from the cafe on the corner. No one knew I had abandoned a wedding. No one knew I was excluded from the very event I helped build. With my money and trust. And no one needed to know. Because what mattered was this. I knew. I knew I was no longer the woman who stayed silent to be accepted. I wasn't trying to prove I deserved to be there. I wasn't looking for a place in a room that always tried to edge me out. I wasn't stepping away from my family, I was stepping toward myself. And if anyone ever asked, I wouldn't hesitate to say, "They said I ruined the wedding." I say, I saved myself. Allison's story is a powerful reminder that sometimes the bravest thing isn't to forgive or endure, it's to walk away from the rules others have forced upon us. In real life, if you've ever been seen as the reliable one, who doesn't need support, remember this. Silence isn't always noble. Sometimes, it's the trap that erases you. You have the right to set boundaries, to stop giving unconditionally, and to choose yourself, without apology. What do you think about Allison's decision? Was she too harsh? Or was she finally just protecting herself after too much hurt? Share your thoughts below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more deeply moving family stories. I learned something very early on. Some children are born to be loved, and some exist only to serve as a backdrop for others to shine. Thomas was the radiant light of our family and I was the leftover. As a child, I often wondered what made him so deserving of all those privileges. Was it because he was a boy, or because he was 4 years older than me? Or was it simply because my parents had long decided that he was more worthy than I was? I never got an answer, only a harsh reality that I had no choice but to accept. Thomas got everything, and I got whatever was left, if anything at all. My parents, Linda and Robert, loved Thomas in a way I had never experienced. I remember sitting at the dinner table in silence, chewing my food while my mother beamed with pride, boasting to my father about Thomas's athletic achievements. If there was a swimming competition, they would hurriedly pack his bags and drive him to the meet, cheering as if he were an Olympic athlete. If there was a soccer match, they would arrive early, waving flags and shouting tirelessly. And me? I was just the quiet girl in the corner, silently arranging my broken crayons, knowing that no one would care if I wanted to learn how to draw. I tried so many times to earn even a sliver of their attention. I got straight A's on all my math tests, but my parents only gave a brief nod before resuming their discussion about Thomas's game strategies. I once painted a beautiful family portrait and excitedly handed it to my mother. But she merely smiled, set it aside, and forgot about it moments later. It wasn't until I was 14 that I finally understood my efforts would never be enough. That day, Thomas received his acceptance letter from Westwood University, a prestigious school my parents had dreamed of for him for years. The moment the letter was opened, my mother screamed with joy, tears welling in her eyes as if this were the most sacred moment of her life. My father clapped Thomas on the back, his voice brimming with pride. "Son, you are the pride of this family." I stood in the kitchen corner, quietly listening as they talked about his future. A few minutes later, I realized they weren't just covering his tuition, they were also buying him an apartment near campus for his convenience. I let out a dry laugh. They never had money to pay for my art classes, but they had money to buy Thomas an apartment. That night, I sat alone in my room, the dim light of my desk lamp reflecting off the certificate I had just received from school, an achievement my parents had never even asked about. Bitterness swelled in my chest, but I didn't cry. I was too used to this feeling. But what hurt me the most wasn't the favoritism, it was the indifference. They didn't hate me, nor did they outright despise me, they simply didn't see me. Perhaps the only reason I survived in that house was because of my grandparents. They were the only ones who truly cared about me, even though they weren't wealthy or power-hungry like my parents. My grandfather owned a small antique shop downtown, a place I often visited whenever I felt lost. My grandmother always welcomed me with a tight hug, and my grandfather always knew how to make me feel like I mattered. One day, when I told them that my parents couldn't afford to send me to art classes, my grandfather simply looked at me in silence, his kind eyes filled with thought. Then he smiled, patted my hand gently, and said, "Catherine, you don't need anyone's permission to chase your dreams. If you truly want something, create it for yourself." I didn't understand his words right away, but a few days later, when he offered me a job at his shop after school so I could earn my own money, I realized that this was his way of teaching me to stand on my own. And that was when I started to change. I stopped waiting for my parents to acknowledge me. I stopped hoping they would see me. I knew that if I wanted something I had to take it for myself. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, if I proved that I was just as valuable, my parents would see me differently. After Thomas left for college, the house became quieter, but the space he left behind was never mine to fill. My parents still talked about him constantly, as if he were still living there. His phone calls became the highlight of their day. My mother would rush to answer, her voice overflowing with happiness every time she heard his voice. My father would always ask about his studies, his friends, his college life, as if nothing in this world mattered more than Thomas's future. And me? I still existed in that house, quietly doing everything like a shadow, invisible in my own home. I never even considered asking my parents for help with tuition, I already knew the answer. But I also refused to give up. I continued working at my grandparents' antique shop, diligently saving every penny for the future I had to build on my own. My days followed the same routine: school in the morning, work in the afternoon, and returning home in the evening to face my parents' indifference. That summer, I received my acceptance letter to Riverside University. It wasn't as prestigious as Thomas's school, but it was the best I could do with the money I had. When I told my parents the news, their reaction was exactly what I had expected. "Oh, is that so?" my mother said, completely devoid of enthusiasm. "Have you figured out how you're going to pay for rent and tuition yet?" I nodded, swallowing the sharp sting in my chest. "I'll use the money I've saved, and I'll keep working to cover the rest of the expenses." Dad flipped the newspaper, not even bothering to look up. "Good. Being independent is the right way." I didn't know what I was expecting. A word of praise? A hint of pride? A simple congratulations? But there was nothing. Just a hollow acknowledgement, as if I was merely doing what they had always expected of me, taking care of myself, because they had never intended to do it for me. I tried not to let it bother me, but it was hard when, at that very moment, Thomas announced he was struggling with some of his classes, and, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, my parents immediately looked for ways to help him. "Thomas needs a tutor," Mom told Dad at dinner that night. "He's not doing well in finance." Dad sighed but nodded. "I think we can manage. After all, we can't let him fall behind." I gripped my fork tightly. A tutor for Tomas? But when I asked for help buying books, they told me I should just go to the bookstore and read what I needed there. It would save money. I said nothing, just kept eating, ignoring the fury simmering in my chest. But the final straw came in the winter of my second year of college. It was pouring that day. I had just finished my shift at the antique shop and stood at the bus stop, shivering in my old coat. The bus was late, and I was nearly frozen by the time it arrived. When I walked into the house, my clothes were soaked, my hair dripping from the rain. Mom glanced at me, but instead of concern, she just sighed. "Where are you all wet?" she asked. "The bus was late, so I had to wait outside," I replied. "You need a car. Standing out in weather like this is awful." I laughed, excitement bubbling in my chest at her words. "A car?" Dad frowned. "Are you planning to walk everywhere for the rest of your life? You need a car to get around, Catherine." I clenched my hands. "So, can I buy one? If I save up half, can you and Mom help with the rest?" The room fell into tense silence. Mom shook her head. "Catherine, you know we can't afford that for you." I let out a bitter laugh. "But you bought a car for Thomas. When he was 18, you helped him get a brand new sedan." Dad set down his newspaper, his eyes cold. "Don't compare, Catherine. You and Thomas are different. Thomas is your older brother." I met his gaze, my voice trembling with anger. "Different how? Because he's a boy? Because he matters more than I do?" Mom let out an exasperated sigh. "It's not like that, it's just, back then, Thomas needed it because he had to travel for school. We were able to help, so we did. But now, you have to understand that our financial situation doesn't allow it." I wanted to scream, I wanted to break something, but instead, I just shook my head and walked upstairs. I got it. I didn't need their help, I never had. That night, I opened my laptop and started searching for a used car on online marketplaces. Something cheap, something that could run, nothing fancy like Thomas's. I knew I'd have to work more hours, but I would buy it with my own money. And when I held the keys to my first car in my hands, 3 months later, I didn't feel bitter. I felt proud. I wasn't the child they loved the most. I wasn't the one who got pampered. But I was the only one in this family who could buy my own car. I had once told myself that one day I would prove to my parents that I was worthy of recognition, that I would show them I wasn't any less capable than Thomas. But that was the naive thinking of someone who didn't yet understand the nature of favoritism. And I realized that on the day Thomas graduated from college. They had been planning for months. A lavish party was held at an upscale restaurant booked weeks in advance to celebrate their son. Guests included distant relatives, my father's colleagues, and family friends. Mom hired a private chef to prepare a gourmet menu, and Dad spared no expense in booking a live band for the event. Everything was perfect. For Thomas. I stood in the corner of the room, watching in disbelief as my parents stood in the center, raising their glasses, recounting Thomas's achievements, as if he were the main character of the world. "Thomas is going to have a brilliant future," Dad announced proudly, clapping him on the back before turning to the crowd. "We are so proud of our son." The applause filled the room. People laughed, raised their glasses in celebration, and me? I just gave a small, hollow smile and took a sip of water in silence. No one mentioned me. No one remembered that I was also in college. No one cared that I had worked tirelessly to achieve my own success. But I was used to it. 3 years later, it was my turn to graduate. No fancy restaurant, no large guest list, no proud speech from my parents. Just a simple dinner at home with a small cake my mother had picked up from the supermarket. She placed the cake on the table, forcing a smile. "Congratulations, Catherine. We can't afford a big celebration like we did for Thomas, but what matters is that you finished your studies." I looked at the tiny cake, then at my parents. "Do you know that I graduated at the top of my class?" Mom looked up at me for a second, then resumed cutting the cake. "Oh, really? That's great, dear. That's something to be proud of." But her voice carried no emotion. Dad didn't even react. He just sat in his chair, scrolling through his phone. I swallowed the bitterness in my throat. What had I been expecting? A big party? A speech? A sincere word of praise? I should have known this would happen to me. Shortly after graduation, I received a job offer from a prestigious financial firm. I finally had a real start, a chance to build my own life. But instead of being proud, my parents were focused on something else. "So, what's your plan now?" Mom asked, as I washed the dishes after dinner. I dried my hands and turned to look at her. "I start work next week. But I'm also looking for a place to stay. I want my own space." Mom nodded, then suddenly seemed to remember something. "Tomas's apartment is still vacant. Maybe you could move in there." I looked at her, a flicker of hope rising in my chest. "Really? You'd let me live there?" Mom smiled. "Of course, but you'll have to pay rent to us." I froze. "Rent?" Dad glanced up from his newspaper. "Yes, you have a job now. You can afford it. We can't just leave the apartment empty without someone paying for it." I let out a dry, bitter laugh. Thomas lived there for 4 years without paying a single cent. Why do I have to pay rent? Dad frowned. "Don't compare yourself to Thomas." Mom nodded. "It's a different situation. When Thomas was in college, we were in a better financial position. Now, we're not." I looked at them, feeling a wave of anger rising inside me, but instead of arguing, I just nodded. "Fine. How much?" Mom smiled as if she had just made a great deal. "We'll give you a slight discount from the market rate. Consider it a good start for you." "A good start?" I said nothing, just stayed quiet. I knew arguing wouldn't change anything. I moved into Thomas's old apartment that weekend. From the very first day, I knew I didn't really belong there. His presence was still everywhere, nail holes in the walls from the pictures he had hung, scratches on the floor from the chair he used to sit in. But at least it was my own space. Every month, on time, I sent my parents the rent. I never missed a single payment. But no matter how much I did, it seemed like they would never stop demanding more. One evening, just after I got home from work, Mom called. "Catherine, I think it's time for you to start paying real rent." I frowned. "What do you mean?" "I've been paying exactly what you asked for every month." "That was when you just started working," Mom said lightly. "Now that you're more stable, I think you can afford to pay full market price." I gripped the phone tightly. "Did Thomas ever pay?" There was silence on the other end for a moment before Mom sighed, her voice laced with irritation. "Catherine, don't bring up the past. You have a good job now. Paying a little more shouldn't be a problem, right? I took a deep breath. A part of me wanted to argue. But then I realized something. They never saw me as part of the family. I could never change them. All right, I replied, my voice calm. I'll think about it. Mom's call came on a Friday evening, just as I got off work after a long day. Her voice was urgent, but not out of concern for me. Catherine, you need to come home immediately, we have something important to discuss. I frowned. My mother never called just to check in. If she said it was important, it meant it had to do with Thomas. What is it, Mom? I asked, a bad feeling creeping up my spine. She sighed. It's Thomas. He's in trouble. He's lost everything, Catherine. I stood still for a few seconds, trying to process her words. Lost everything? What do you mean? His business went bankrupt. His wife Sarah just gave birth. They have nowhere to go. So. Mom paused for a moment before continuing, her voice firm, almost commanding. We've decided that Thomas and his family will be moving into the apartment you're living in. I gripped the phone tightly, feeling the blood in my veins boil. My apartment? Are you serious? Don't be selfish, Catherine, Mom snapped. Your brother is struggling, he needs a place to stay. You live there alone, there's plenty of space. I let out a bitter laugh. Plenty of space? Do you remember that I pay rent for that apartment? Mom hesitated. Yes, but. I cut her off. So, are they going to contribute? Will they be paying part of the rent? There was silence. Then Mom spoke again, her voice as if she were stating the obvious. No. Thomas is going through a tough time. He doesn't have the money to pay. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. I already knew the answer, but that didn't make it hurt any less. And what about me? I asked, my voice ice cold. Do I still have to pay full rent while he and his family live there for free? You have a stable job, just help out for a while, Mom said, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. I didn't answer right away. I just felt a deep sense of exhaustion settle in my chest. This was how it had always been? No one asked if I was okay with it. No one cared about what I thought. And I was simply expected to accept it. That weekend, Thomas and his family moved in. They didn't just bring their luggage, they brought with them an air of failure and entitlement. Sarah held their newborn son David, her face tired but still carrying an expression that suggested, I should be grateful they were here. Thomas didn't even look at me. He just dropped his bags on the floor, let out a heavy sigh, and collapsed onto the couch as if he owned the place. Mom stood in the middle of the room, clapping her hands in satisfaction. This is great! The apartment is spacious enough for everyone to live comfortably. I crossed my arms, trying to keep my anger in check. So, they'll be staying in the living room, right? Mom turned to me, her expression filled with disapproval. Of course not, Catherine. A baby can't sleep in the living room. You'll move out and sleep on the sofa. I froze. The sofa? I repeated, disbelief dripping from my voice. You're kicking me out of my own bedroom? It's not kicking you out, Mom said, shaking her head as if I were the unreasonable one. It's just that you can sacrifice a little for your brother's family. Sarah placed David in his bassinet and glanced at me with a fake smile. We really appreciate this, Catherine. This is a difficult time for us. I looked at her. I looked at Thomas. I looked at my parents. Then I turned toward the bedroom. The room I had worked so hard to have. A week ago, it was mine. Now, I was being pushed onto the couch in the very apartment I was still paying rent for. I had endured unfair treatment many times in my life, but this was the final straw. The following days were a nightmare. Every morning, I woke up to David's piercing cries. If it wasn't his crying, it was the endless arguments between Thomas and Sarah about money. They had no jobs, no plans, and no intention of changing their situation. Thomas spent his days lounging on the couch, scrolling through his phone. Sarah constantly complained about how exhausting it was to take care of a baby. Yet she never lifted a finger to help with household chores. Everything fell on me: the utility bills, the groceries, the basic upkeep of the apartment. I tried reminding them. I tried having a conversation. But my words were dismissed every single time. "We're going through a tough time," Thomas would say, not even glancing up from his screen. "Families should support each other," Mom would scold, as if I were the cruel one for asking for fairness. And every day when I returned home after long hours of work, I found my apartment in complete disarray: children's toys scattered everywhere, dirty clothes piled up, dishes overflowing in the sink. No one cleaned. No one cared that I was still the only one paying rent. I was no longer the owner of this apartment. I was just a stranger, forced into the role of an unwilling sponsor for my family. But the worst was yet to come. One evening, just as I walked through the door, I saw my mother waiting for me. "Catherine, we need to talk." I tossed my bag onto the couch, trying to suppress my exhaustion. "What now?" Mom took a sip of her tea and spoke slowly, as if she were delivering good news. "Your father and I have decided to increase the rent for the apartment." I froze. "What?" "With more people living here, the utility bills and living expenses have increased. So we think it's only fair for you to contribute more." I let out a bitter laugh. "And what will Thomas contribute?" Mom shrugged. "Thomas is going through a rough time. He can't afford to pay right now." I looked at her, then around the apartment, this place where I had been reduced to a stranger. And at that moment, I knew exactly what I had to do. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep letting them use me. I needed to get out. I thought I had grown used to my family's unfair treatment. But even I hadn't expected them to take it this far. That night, when Mom announced I would have to pay double rent to support the family, I was suspicious, but I had no proof, until I heard them admit it with my own ears. After a long, exhausting day at work, I returned to the apartment, the place I was supposed to call home, but had long stopped feeling like one. I opened the door to find Thomas sprawled on the couch, his legs kicked up on the table like he had never known responsibility. Sarah sat beside him, scrolling through her phone, while David slept peacefully in his crib. I walked into the kitchen to grab a drink, trying to ignore their presence. And then, I heard it, the words that made my blood run cold. "I can't believe she's still paying," Sarah giggled. "Honestly, this is even easier than I thought." "Told you," Thomas replied smugly. "Catherine wouldn't dare do anything. She always does whatever Mom and Dad tell her." I stood there, frozen. Sarah's voice lowered, but the smugness remained. "What about the rent money your parents take from her? I heard Mom say they still send us half of it every month." Thomas laughed, a sound that made my stomach turn. "Yeah, this is great. No rent, free place to stay, and extra cash in our pockets. How long do you think it'll take for Catherine to realize she's just a fool, being used?" I gripped the glass in my hand tightly. So this was the truth. Not only was I being forced to pay double rent, but that money was going straight into Thomas and Sarah's pockets. They had no idea I was standing nearby. They didn't know I had heard everything. But I knew. And at that moment, I decided I wasn't going to put up with this for another second. I was leaving. Tonight. I walked straight into the bedroom, the room that had once been mine but now bore the marks of someone else. Sarah's paintings, Thomas's clothes, David's toys. Every single thing in that space reminded me that I no longer belonged here. I opened the closet and pulled out the biggest suitcase I had. I didn't need much, just the essentials. I stuffed in a few sets of clothes, my laptop, and the small jewelry box my grandmother had given me. The rest? I didn't care anymore. When I zipped up the suitcase, it felt as though a weight had been lifted off my chest. I no longer felt hesitation or fear. I was leaving, and I wasn't coming back. Opening my laptop, I searched for a new apartment faster than I ever thought possible. I had considered this move many times, but had never taken action. But now, after hearing the truth, there was nothing left to hold me back. It took less than an hour to find the perfect place. A one-bedroom apartment. Clean. Quiet. Just a 15-minute walk from my job. No more invaded privacy. No more being the family's ATM. I called the landlord immediately. I want to rent the apartment. Can I move in right away? A woman's voice answered. You can come see it now if you'd like. I didn't need to see it, I just needed to go. I'll be there in 20 minutes. I stepped out of the bedroom, dragging my suitcase behind me, my heart pounding in my chest. Thomas was still on the couch, but this time he looked up, frowning. Catherine, what are you doing? I didn't stop. Moving out. Sarah lifted her head from her phone, raising an eyebrow. What? I pulled my suitcase through the living room without looking at them. I said I'm leaving. Right now. Thomas shot up from the couch. Catherine, stop joking, you can't just leave. I stopped at the door and turned to look him straight in the eye. Watch me. His mouth fell open, but no words came out. I opened the door and stepped outside. No goodbyes, no looking back. That night, I walked into my new apartment. The landlord handed me the keys, I signed the lease, and she left. I stood in the empty living room, my suitcase beside me. No more crying babies, no more fights, no more demands for money. Just silence. I sank down onto the floor leaning against the wall. And for the first time in years, I felt free. The next morning my phone buzzed non-stop, calls from Mom, messages from Thomas. A voice in my head told me that if I answered, they would try to pull me back in. I pressed the block button. I was no longer their fool. They would have to take care of themselves, for the first time in their lives. And me? I would live the life I deserved. No one could take that away from me anymore. 3 days after I left, my phone started ringing non-stop. Thomas. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. I had predicted their reaction the moment I walked out of that apartment. First, there would be panic, then anger, followed by guilt, tripping. They wouldn't accept that I had left without permission. That I had dared to do something they never thought I was capable of. Freeing myself. I sat in my new apartment, sipping a hot cup of coffee, enjoying a peace I had never known before. No more crying babies, no more demands, no more feeling trapped in my own home. But then, a message popped up on my screen, making me laugh. A cold, hollow laugh, devoid of any emotion for them. Mom, Catherine, do you really think you can just walk away like this? I set my coffee down on the table. A few seconds later, another message came through. Mom. You haven't sent this month's rent yet. Your father and I are struggling, because Thomas and Sarah still don't have jobs. You can't just abandon your family like this. I stared at the screen, considering my response. Then, I made my decision. I wasn't going to pay another cent. I opened the message and typed a simple reply. I'm no longer responsible for that apartment. It belongs to Thomas now. I'm sure he'll figure it out. Best of luck. I hit send and immediately blocked the number. This was over. The following weeks passed in complete silence. No calls, no messages, no threats. I didn't know if they had truly given up or if they were just trying to find a new way to pull me back in, but I didn't care anymore. I poured all my energy into work. Without the weight of my family holding me down, I was able to fully focus on my career, and it paid off quickly. 2 months after leaving, I was promoted. My salary doubled. The company gave me my own office. I signed a long-term lease for my new apartment, decorated it exactly the way I wanted, and for the first time, had a space that truly felt like my own. I spent my weekends exploring the city, trying out cafes I had never had the time to visit before. I joined a yoga class, met new people, expanded my social circle. Life had never been better. I no longer thought about my family. I no longer cared what they thought, wanted, or expected from me. They were no longer my problem. 3 months later, a former colleague casually mentioned Thomas. I heard your brother is looking for a job, he said as we sipped coffee in the break room. Seems like he's struggling a bit. I raised an eyebrow, unable to hide my amusement. Oh, is that so? He nodded. A friend of mine in HR said he's been sending out applications everywhere, but no one's hiring him. Having a failed business on his record. Well, companies don't want to take that risk. I simply smiled, taking another sip of my coffee. Well, that's unfortunate. I didn't ask for more details. I didn't need to know. But a few days later, I heard another update. This time from my grandmother. She was the only family member I still kept in touch with. Even though I never asked about Thomas or my parents, she would occasionally tell me what was going on. "They're in a tough situation," Grandma said, her voice filled with both sympathy and disappointment. "Thomas still hasn't found a job. Sarah does nothing but complain. And your parents? They're exhausted." I simply nodded, showing no reaction. But then she said something that actually made me laugh. "Sarah is pregnant again." I set my teacup down, my expression unshaken. "Really?" She nodded. "Yes. And your parents are trying to figure out how to help them again." I shook my head. "That's not my problem." Grandma sighed. "You really don't want to help at all?" I looked straight into her eyes, my voice firmer than ever. Though they had chosen this path. They had chosen to favor Thomas, to believe that I would always be there to save them. But they were wrong. I stood up, kissed her cheek and said, "I have to go now. Thank you for talking to me." She gave me a sad smile. "As long as you're happy, that's all that matters." And for the first time in my life, I truly was. Not because I had gotten revenge. Not because I had proven anything to my parents. But because I had let them go. No more anger, no more resentment. Just my own life, a life I could finally live on my own terms. And no matter how Thomas, Sarah, or my parents managed, it was no longer my concern. Catherine's story is not just a tale of family betrayal, it is a testament to the power of independence and personal boundaries. She was used, overlooked, and taken for granted. But instead of resigning herself to that fate, she had the courage to step away from the toxic cycle and choose her own life. This is an important lesson in real life. No one is obligated to carry the burdens of others, especially those who only seek to take advantage. Setting boundaries, protecting your self-worth, and learning to walk away from toxic relationships are essential for a happy and peaceful life. Catherine's story is a powerful reminder of the value of independence and personal boundaries. What do you think about how she handled her family? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to follow the channel for more compelling stories about family and life. If someone had told me that a phone call in the middle of the night could rip my life in half, I probably would have scoffed. But that night I heard my mother screaming. A scream that haunted me for years to come. In just a few fleeting minutes, the world I cherished was blown away like ashes in a storm. And from that moment on, I was never an innocent child again. My name is Ava Bennett. I grew up in a small teal-colored house in the suburbs of Savannah, Georgia. My family wasn't wealthy, but we had everything that mattered most. Love, laughter, and dreams growing bigger every day. My father, Matthew Bennett, was the greatest man I ever knew. Starting with nothing, he founded Bennett Freight Services with just 3 battered old trucks. I still remember the days he came home, his jacket stained with grease, his eyes sparkling with pride, after fixing a broken engine himself. My mother, Claire, worked as a manager at a small cafe in town. She often complained about the hard work, but whenever she looked at my father's smile, she would quietly return one of her own. I loved that simple life. The cozy family dinners, evening walks under sprawling oak trees at the park, and most of all, our weekend ice cream trips. A tradition my father never missed, no matter how busy he was. When I turned 9, my father's business began to thrive. He secured a major contract transporting goods for a regional supermarket chain. Within a year we moved into a brand new 2-story house, complete with a sprawling backyard and a small bridge over a sparkling pond. That was when I finally had my own room. I painted it lavender, strung fairy lights across the ceiling and plastered the walls with drawings I made myself. The massive bookshelf my father built still bore small scratches from my clumsy decorating. My mother soon quit her job, just as she had always promised. She said she could finally become a real housewife, caring for the family she had long dreamed of. But instead, she gradually disappeared. From our dinners, our evenings, the little moments we once shared, she was always busy. At the salon, out shopping, meeting friends, buying luxurious things our family didn't truly need. Still, my father never let me feel alone. Every Sunday, without fail, he took me out for ice cream, sitting for hours just to listen to me ramble about math homework, school friends, or whatever nonsense seemed vital to me at the time. In his eyes, nothing about me was ever trivial. He made me feel like I was his whole world. I remember so vividly the last afternoon we spent together. It was a sunny day, the breeze light and cool. We sat on our familiar park bench, each holding a cone of ice cream. My father laughed while telling me about a rushed delivery he had to cover for a sick driver. "Can I come with you, Dad?" I chirped excitedly, eyes shining. He chuckled, ruffling my hair, his voice low and warm. "Not this time, Princess. It's a long overnight haul, but I promise I'll be back before you know it." I hugged him tightly that night before bed, whispering, "I love you, Dad." I had no idea it would be the last time I ever said those words to him. The next morning, before dawn, I heard his truck engine rumble to life and fade into the mist. I lay in bed, pulling the covers over my head, a vague gnawing fear curling in my chest. At exactly 2:38 a.m., the phone shattered the silence. I heard my mother's blood-curdling scream and shot up in bed. There was the sound of something crashing, her wails tearing through the house. I ran out of my room, my heart hammering. What happened after is a blur. Police officers. Flashing red lights. Muted whispers. Head-on collision. Died instantly. Didn't feel a thing. My mother collapsed on the couch, sobbing violently. I stood frozen in the center of the living room, numb and shivering. They said a large cargo truck had lost control on the interstate, blocking the road, and my father, my hero, didn't stand a chance. The day of his funeral, a light drizzle fell. I stood before the closed casket, unable to believe the man who once carried me piggyback through our backyard now lay inside. My mother wailed and clutched the casket as if trying to drug it back. Back then, I thought it was raw grief. Now, looking back, I know it was just the opening act of a nightmare far crueler than I could imagine. After the funeral, I naively believed the worst was over. I was wrong. Losing my father was just the beginning of a darker spiral through my childhood. My mother, Claire, was no longer the gentle woman who once read me stories under the porch. Just days after the funeral, she became someone else entirely. Cold, sharp, and greedily unrecognizable. I vividly remember that first afternoon after burying my father. She spent hours on the phone, her voice steely and metallic. "I'm the sole heir. That's right, all the shares of Bennett Freight Services now belong to me," she said, loudly into the phone, not even bothering to lower her voice, though I sat quietly nearby, doing homework. I looked up, heart pounding. My father's company, his blood, sweat, and dreams, now belonged to someone who neither understood nor cared about his legacy. Within 2 weeks, my mother fired the entire old management team. People who had been loyal to my father, who had once treated our family like their own. No thank yous, no second thoughts. In their place, she hired a pack of so-called consultants, men in sharp suits and flashy cars, whose mouths spewed nothing but hollow buzzwords. "We're going to restructure the entire business model," one bald man, who called himself the strategy director, announced loudly in the living room, the same room where my father once fixed shipping logs late into the night. "Bennett Freight needs a total makeover if it's going to survive." I was 11 years old. I didn't understand corporate jargon, but I knew something was terribly wrong. The changes came like a hurricane. The old but reliable trucks were sold off, replaced with expensive, impractical new models. The stable routes my father had spent years building were uprooted. Longtime clients began pulling their contracts. I overheard heated phone calls, angry customers demanding explanations, truckers furious over pay cuts and brutal schedules. Some even came to our house, desperation burning in their eyes. "We've got families to feed," a man named Mr. Carter shouted through the living room window. "You're destroying this company." My mother laughed coldly and slammed the window shut. Maria, the nanny who had cared for me since I was a baby, would just shake her head sadly every time another truck disappeared from the lot. "Your daddy must be heartbroken watching from heaven, Ava," she whispered once, folding my clothes. I didn't answer. I couldn't. A lump of grief choked my throat. Only 6 months after my father's death, Bennett Freight Services, once the backbone of regional transportation, was crumbling. Unpaid bills stacked high. Contract cancellations flooded in. Truckers, office staff, accountants, all walked away, one after another. I watched them pack their desks, faces weighed down with sorrow. Some even paused to look at me, the little girl they once lifted onto their truck cabs. Their eyes filled with silent regret. All I could do was clutch my worn-out doll, standing at the window, the crushing helplessness drowning every breath I took. Not long after that, another piece of news shattered the last fragile hope inside me. My mother decided to sell the company. "We need a fresh start," she declared coldly at dinner, with only me sitting silently at the table. "All that old stuff is just dragging our lives down." I clutched the edge of the table, whispering, "That was Dad's dream." Mother scoffed. "What good are the dreams of the dead? Living is what matters." She sold Bennett Freight Services to a private investment firm for a rock-bottom price. A number so disgracefully low that even I, an 11-year-old child, could see it was a blatant betrayal of my father. On the day of the signing, my mother wore a flaming red dress, heavy makeup, and smiled brightly for photos with the men who bought the company. Meanwhile, I stood on the porch, watching the Bennett Freight Services sign being taken down, feeling as if every cell in my body was being ripped apart. That evening, I asked my mother, "What are we going to do now?" She shrugged, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Go shopping, and find a better life." I quietly returned to my room, staring at the pale lavender wall, where the glow-in-the-dark stars my dad and I once stuck had long faded. Inside me, something shattered. Something that could never be repaired. But little did I know, this was only the beginning. The real collapse was still lurking just outside the door, along with the unfamiliar faces my mother was preparing to bring in to replace my life. The emptiness inside the house grew bigger every day, like a crack running deep through the foundation. I thought nothing could be worse than losing my father and watching my mother destroy everything he built. But once again, I was wrong. My world was about to collapse, fast, brutal, and without warning. One early summer evening, my mother came home with a strange manic gleam in her eyes, and a strange man walking beside her. That man was Richard Hayes, tall, overweight, dressed in ridiculously flashy clothes, wearing a fake smile that barely clung to his face. "Ava, this is Richard, and I have wonderful news," she announced, her voice dripping with crazed excitement. "We got married last week in Miami." I froze in place, feeling like I had just been slapped. "Your new father will help us become a complete family," she continued, ignoring the horror etched on my face. "I don't need a new father," I blurted out, my voice trembling with rage. Richard's smile hardened into an unpleasant sneer. He leaned in close, his breath reeking of mint and cheap wine. "Listen here, kid, I make the rules in this house. If you want a peaceful life, you better learn to obey." I clenched my fists, fighting back tears. Deep inside, I knew the nightmare was only just beginning. A few days later, it wasn't just Richard invading my life. It was his entire family, crashing into our home like an unstoppable storm. Gloria Hayes, Richard's mother, a scowling woman whose eyes picked apart everything she saw. Janet Hay, his sister, shameless and snide, glaring at me like I was a blemish on their perfect world. And worst of all, Madison, Janet's 12-year-old daughter, always strutting around like a princess, treating me like a servant. Within a week, the house I grew up in became unrecognizable. Gloria ordered all the living room furniture replaced, claiming that old style was suffocating. Janet turned my father's study into a yoga room. Madison dumped her clothes and toys all over the house, turning it into a chaotic mess. I clung desperately to my bedroom, the last sanctuary that still held a trace of my father. The pale lavender walls, the fairy lights, the bookshelf he had built with his own hands. They were the only fragments of memory I had left. But even that was soon ripped away. One afternoon after school, I walked into the house and felt a chill run down my spine. Madison was dancing around in my room, surrounded by wide-open suitcases. "What the hell is going on?" I shouted, my voice cracking. Madison spun around, smirking. "Mom said I could have this room, it's bigger. You're moving into the tiny one down the hall." I looked around, my books thrown across the floor, photos of me and Dad scattered like trash. The bookshelf he had built was dismantled, broken into pieces in the corner. A wave of pure fury surged through me. I lunged at Madison and we tumbled to the ground, pulling hair, scratching, screaming. Heavy footsteps pounded up the stairs. Billy, Richard, and my mother burst in, dragging us apart like feral cats. "Enough!" Richard roared, his face crimson with rage. "Ava, you're acting like an animal." My mother didn't defend me. She didn't even ask what had happened. Instead, she slapped me hard across the face, her eyes blazing with anger. "Go to your new room, and learn your place," she hissed. Richard grabbed my arm roughly, yanking me down the hall. They locked me in the tiny guest room. Cold, damp, windowless. They only opened the door for school in the morning and bathroom breaks at night. I curled up in the corner, my pillow soaked with tears, listening to Madison blasting music in what used to be my sanctuary, while my mother laughed downstairs with Janet as if nothing was wrong. In that moment I realized I had lost everything. My father, my family, my home. And now, my entire childhood. But I didn't know yet that this pain was only the prelude to an even more brutal betrayal. The following months were an endless nightmare. I lived like a ghost in the house that once was my haven. Every day I tiptoed around, trying not to make a sound, not to draw attention, not to provoke Richard or Gloria. But no matter how careful I was, it was never enough. Richard found every excuse to torment me. He screamed over the smallest things, a towel not folded right, shoes not perfectly aligned by the door. Each time, he would grab my arm, squeezing so hard bruises bloomed instantly. And my mother? She just watched. Not a word. Not a flicker of pity in her eyes. Lola Ohayen brum belittled me in front of others. "That girl has bad blood," Gloria said loudly every time guests were around. "Born from lowly roots, completely impossible to educate." As for Madison, spoiled like a princess by her mother and grandmother, she grew crueler by the day. She hid my school books, smeared glue on my chair, and once even poured soapy water into my sneakers. I used to believe that if I endured long enough, they would change, that my mother would come to her senses. But one night, I realized just how naive I had been. It was a rainy Saturday night. I couldn't sleep, curled up in my dark, cage-like room. Laughter floated up from the living room, sneaking through the crack under my door. Curious, I crept out, my bare feet silent on the freezing hallway floor. I stopped at the top of the staircase, hiding behind the wall, and listened. Richard's voice rumbled first, hoarse and laced with malice. "The girl is getting more disrespectful. I told you she doesn't belong in this family." Gloria snorted coldly. "Keeping her here only ruins the atmosphere. Madison's scared to even share the same roof with her." My mother. At first she stayed silent. I held my breath, hoping she would defend me. Stand up like a real mother should. But then she spoke. Her voice chillingly gentle. "Maybe. It's time to find her another home." A heavy silence fell. I could almost hear the sound of my heart cracking in my chest. "You mean, Put her up for adoption? Janet asked, a hint of smugness in her tone. Yes, my mother replied without the slightest hesitation. She's still young enough. It would be better for everyone. I gripped the banister so hard my nails dug into my palms, drawing blood. Each word they spoke sliced into me like a cold, sharp blade. I know a few orphanages that take kids her age, Gloria added sweetly, her voice dripping with poison. We can arrange it quickly. Richard let out a dry, cruel laugh. Finally, we'll get our peace back. And my mother, the same woman who once cradled me through fevers, who taught me to spell my first words, simply sighed in relief, as if shedding a heavy burden. I turned and ran, my heart hammering, tears pouring uncontrollably down my face. I stumbled in the darkness, scraping my knees, but I didn't dare make a sound. I curled up in the corner of my tiny room, pulled the blanket over my head, and shook with silent sobs. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating in my mind, they can't do this. They can't. Mom wouldn't leave me. Mom wouldn't. But a part of me, the part already shredded by years of suffering, knew it wasn't hope anymore. It was just a lie I clung to for survival. That night, I didn't sleep. I counted every tick of the clock, every raindrop tapping against the window. Each sound was a death knell for the last fragile pieces of my heart. I swore to myself, if they truly intended to throw me away like some broken thing, I wouldn't let it happen easily. I would fight, even if I had only a shred of strength left, even if the whole world turned its back on me. Because I had already lost my father. I had already lost my home. I would not let them take away the last remnants of my dignity. My 13th birthday arrived under a suffocating, gloomy cloud. No birthday cake, no balloons, no friends gathered in laughter like before. My mother, Claire, begrudgingly hosted a sad family dinner in the cold dining room. The table was lined with a few cold dishes and the faces I wished I could erase. Richard, Gloria, Janet, and Madison. I sat there, arms folded tightly, throat choked. Deep down, I knew, today would not be an ordinary day. The doorbell rang, slicing through the heavy air. I held my breath. And then I saw Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren, my father's brother and his wife, walk through the door. Uncle Ethan was still tall, wiry but steady, with sorrow weighing heavily in his eyes. Aunt Lauren wore a deep blue coat, clutching a small gift wrapped in shimmering silver paper. When she saw me, she smiled softly. The only genuine smile I'd seen in months. "Happy birthday, Ava," Uncle Ethan said, pulling me into a gentle hug. I nearly broke down right then in his arms. But that fragile joy lasted only a fleeting moment. My mother stood up, the screech of her chair harsh and jarring. She cleared her throat, her eyes darting away from mine, as if I were some burden she couldn't shed fast enough. "I'm glad you both came," she began, her voice syrupy and fake. "Actually, there's something important I need to discuss." The room instantly grew colder. I felt my heart pounding against my ribs, each beat louder than the last. "Ava no longer fits into our new life," my mother continued, speaking of me as if I were an outdated piece of furniture. "Our family needs peace and she's just too difficult." I stared at her. No shame, no hesitation. "I think," she said, glancing quickly at Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren, "since you don't have children, maybe you'd like to adopt Ava." That sentence, in that moment, pierced me like a velvet-wrapped dagger. On my birthday, a day every child dreams of feeling loved, my own mother was discarding me like defective merchandise. The entire room went dead silent. Madison smirked. Richard crossed his legs, tapping his fingers on his knee. Gloria watched me like she was waiting for me to break down and beg. I didn't mind. I just stared at my mother, the woman who once held me during thunderstorms, and silently asked, "Who are you? When did you become so heartless?" A loud crash echoed as Uncle Ethan shoved his chair back, knocking it over. "We're taking Ava home," Uncle Ethan said, his voice full of a fury I had never heard before. "And let me make this clear, Claire. You're no longer her mother from this moment on." Aunt Lauren quickly wrapped her arm around my shoulders, whispering, "It's okay, sweetheart, we're taking you home." My mother crossed her arms and shrugged. "Fine, one less burden. No goodbye hug. No apology. Not even a backward glance." Richard lifted his wine glass and clinked it lightly with Gloria and Janet, as if sealing a successful business deal. I stood up, holding my head as high as I could, clutching tightly the small gift Aunt Lauren had brought me. The last remnant of my pride. Before stepping out the door, I heard Madison's mocking voice behind me. "Aren't those officially mine now?" Her and Janet's giggles echoed down the hallway, sharp and cold as blades slicing into every inch of me. Uncle Ethan took my hand and led me through the hallway and out to the front yard. The Savannah night drizzled softly, each raindrop piercing like ice into my bones. I didn't look back, not even once. When the car door shut behind me, I knew I had just walked out of hell. And this time, I swore to myself, I would never let anyone drag me into the abyss again. That night's drive took me to a different world. A place where, for the first time in so long, I felt like I mattered. Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren's house sat in a quiet northern corner of Savannah, filled with the scent of jasmine and the soft whisper of wind against the white picket fence. It wasn't a big or fancy house, but every brick and window radiated warmth. A kind of warmth I thought I would never feel again. The next day, they officially filed adoption papers for me. The process moved heartbreakingly fast. My mother, Claire, signed without reading a word, never showed up in court, never sent a message. When the judge declared I was now legally the daughter of Ethan and Lauren, I cried. But they were tears of liberation, no longer terrified of abandonment, no longer haunted by feeling unworthy of love. They treated me like blood. Not with grand gestures or flowery words, but with steady patience. With proud smiles when I brought home an A. With cheering voices when I won a speech competition at school. "You don't have to fight to be loved here, Ava," Aunt Lauren whispered once, holding me tight. "We loved you from the very first moment." With their unwavering support, I began to thrive. I threw myself into my studies, as if making up for all the lost years. I joined the book club, the volleyball team, the student council. Everything I once only dared dream about. And for the first time, no one mocked me. No one pushed me down. At 17, I was accepted into the honors program at Riverside Prep, the most prestigious private school in the area. When the acceptance letter came, I rushed into the house waving it like a trophy. Uncle Ethan read it over and over while Aunt Lauren hugged me so tightly her eyes welled up with tears. They never missed a single event. Every parent-teacher meeting, every academic award ceremony, every little volleyball match. Every time I stepped onto a stage to receive an award, I could hear the loudest cheers coming from the corner of the stands, where they always waited for me. I grew up, bathed in unconditional love, and it pulled me out of the abyss I had once been drowning in. When college application season came, Uncle and Aunt had quietly saved enough money for me to choose any school I wanted. I chose to major in finance at the State University of Georgia, dreaming of one day building a solid career, just like my father once dreamed. College wasn't easy. The pressure was intense, the sleepless nights brutal, the exams nightmarish. But I never allowed myself to fall apart. Every time I wanted to quit, I thought of Uncle Ethan's steady gaze, Aunt Lauren's reassuring grip, and the long, hard journey I had fought through to earn this chance. 4 years later, I graduated with honors, ranked in the top 5% of my class. On graduation day, as I stood on the stage receiving my diploma and looked out into the crowd, I saw them, both crying with pride. Aunt Lauren waved wildly, and Uncle Ethan held up a handmade sign that read, "Proud of you, Ava." I had made it. But it was only the beginning. Right after graduation, I received a job offer from Morgan & Blake Investments, a major financial firm based in Atlanta. The starting salary stunned me. A number the little Ava locked in a dark room once wouldn't have even dared to dream of. With my first paycheck, I immediately bought 2 gifts. A handcrafted leather watch for Uncle Ethan, and a delicate pearl necklace for Aunt Lauren. When I handed them the gifts, I whispered, "Without you two, there would be no Ava today." Aunt Lauren cried. Uncle Ethan pulled me into his arms. And after so many years, for the first time, I truly felt whole. I continued to climb the career ladder, step by step, refusing to quit, refusing to slow down. Each promotion, each achievement, was a silent answer to those who once treated me like a burden, who had coldly thrown me away. I didn't just survive. I lived. And I lived brilliantly. But I didn't know yet that a ghost from my past was quietly finding a way back into my life. Just when I thought I had finally found happiness. My life entered a whole new chapter at 25. The year I got engaged to the most wonderful man I had ever met. Daniel Carter. A young, talented attorney, with a warm smile and eyes full of unwavering trust. We met at a financial seminar in Atlanta, and from that very first day, I knew he was the one I would build my future with. Daniel proposed on a quiet beach at Hilton Head Island, under a blazing red sunset. When he knelt down, hands trembling, holding out the ring, I cried and said yes before he could even finish asking. In the months that followed, Aunt Lauren and I threw ourselves into wedding planning. We chose to hold the ceremony at Meadowbrook Estate, a historic estate covered in lush greenery and wildflowers blooming along every path. Everything unfolded perfectly, filled with laughter and overwhelming joy. Until a name from the past suddenly reappeared, dragging with it a storm I never saw coming. One evening while I was sitting with Aunt Lauren working on the guest list, my phone buzzed. A Facebook message from a stranger. "Dearest Ava. It's Mom. I heard you're getting married. I miss you so much. We've lost too much time already. Please give me a chance to be part of your special day. I've changed. I love you very much." My hand froze, my eyes glued to the screen, as if it had turned into a venomous snake. I didn't need to ask who Mom was. Claire. Rage and nausea surged simultaneously. The woman who had coldly thrown me out of her house on my 13th birthday, now sending me sweet, fake words? I handed the phone to Aunt Lauren. She read it quickly, her face turning cold. "I saw her at the market yesterday," Aunt Lauren said softly. "She didn't even ask about you. But when I mentioned you're getting married and how successful you've become, her face changed immediately." I gripped my pen tightly, my knuckles turning white. "And there's more," Aunt Lauren continued, her voice low and heavy. "I heard Madison. She got pregnant at 19. Her husband's no good, unemployed. Their whole family is drowning in debt." I let out a dry, hollow laugh. Of course. It wasn't because they missed me. It wasn't because they loved me. It was because they smelled money. I picked up my phone, typing each word like a knife. "Claire, let me be clear. You are not my mother. You lost that right long ago." "Huh? The night you gave me away like discarded trash. I have a real family now. They chose me, loved me unconditionally, something you never did. Don't contact me again. I don't want to see you at my wedding. Ever." I hit send, then blocked her. No hesitation. No regret. I sat still for a few moments, feeling something lift from my heart, like shedding an invisible chain that had bound me for years. It was over. Decisively. No more lingering hopes. No more delusions that someday she might truly regret it and love me like a real mother. That night, Daniel held me close and whispered, "I'm proud of you, Ava. Not because you're strong, but because you chose yourself." I rested my head against his shoulder, and for the first time in so long I felt completely at peace. But I didn't know yet. Claire wasn't the type to give up so easily. she would bring her entire broken family to the gates of my wedding, creating a scene I could never have imagined. My wedding day unfolded beneath a perfect, brilliant blue sky, as if the universe itself was blessing a new beginning. Meadowbrook Estate was bathed in sunlight, wildflowers blooming brightly along the stone paths, and soft music floating from a small string quartet in the garden corner. The air carried the sweet scent of lavender, drifting gently in the breeze. I stood in the bridal room, wearing a pure white gown, simple yet elegant, carefully chosen with Aunt Lauren during those joyful, busy days. Aunt Lauren squeezed my hand, her eyes shimmering with tears. "You're incredible, Ava. You've overcome so much to stand here today." I smiled, feeling my heart pound, but no longer with fear. No more anxiety. No more bleeding wounds. A soft knock at the door. Uncle Ethan peeked in, his face brimming with pride. "Ready, princess?" I nodded, tears glistening in my eyes. Not out of sadness, but because I knew I was truly, unconditionally loved. I looped my arm through his. The man who had walked every painful step with me. Who had lifted me up every time I stumbled. And we stepped out. The music swelled. Everyone stood, turning to watch. At the end of the white-carpeted aisle, Daniel stood waiting, dressed in a silver-gray suit, his eyes lighting up the moment he saw me. Every step I took toward him was a step away from the darkness of my past. But just before I reached the altar, a commotion broke out at the gate. A security guard hurried over, whispering to the wedding coordinator. I narrowed my eyes, my stomach sinking, a familiar dread rising. I turned my head slightly, and I saw them, Claire, Richard, and a scruffy teenage boy, undoubtedly her later-born son, yelling from outside the iron gates, being held back. I caught fragments of the shouting. "Ava, you can't do this. I'm your mother." Richard bellowed too. "We need you. Family is forever." I felt the weight of every eye on me. Daniel gently squeezed my hand, his eyes asking silently, "Are you okay?" I took a deep breath and turned my back on the gates, turning my back on those who had once discarded me so cruelly. Not a glance back. Not an ounce of pity. I walked straight to the altar. The music swelled again. The people who truly loved me smiled through their tears, genuine, not false. The ceremony unfolded under the glowing afternoon sun. Daniel's voice trembled as he recited his vows. "Ava, you are not just the love of my life. You are proof that courage and love can conquer anything." I choked up, replying, "Daniel, you are my home. A place where I never have to fight to be loved again." Thunderous applause erupted as we kissed for the first time as husband and wife. In the front row, Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren clung to each other, their tears falling freely. I looked at them, my heart overflowing with gratitude. They were my real parents, not because of blood, but because they had chosen to love me unconditionally. The reception lasted well into the night. We danced under golden lights, ate wedding cake, and laughed beneath bursts of small fireworks lighting up the night sky. No one mentioned those who had once destroyed my childhood. No one needed to. Because with every smile, every hug, every heartfelt blessing, I knew I had truly left that past behind. Later that night, I sat with Daniel, under a canopy of green vines. He held my hand and whispered, "We'll build a family like that, Ava, a real one." I leaned my head against his shoulder and whispered back, "I know, because I learned from the best." And at that moment, I finally felt what I had yearned for all these years. Freedom, peace, and true love. From a little girl abandoned by her own mother on her birthday, Ava rose through the deepest heartbreaks to reclaim her worth. Thanks to the unconditional love of Uncle Ethan and Aunt Lauren, she built a new life. Full, independent, and brilliant. Today, Ava is no longer shackled by her past. She lives a life of her own choosing, filled with happiness, freedom, and the kind of real love that once was stolen from her. Now fully hers to keep. What do you think about Ava's journey? Would you have the strength to rise again after such losses? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Don't forget to follow the channel for more heartfelt stories about family and life. My mother raised her glass of red wine in the middle of her lavish birthday party and smiled as if about to offer a blessing. But no, what she said froze the air for a few short seconds. "I am proud of all my children, except one." Awkward laughter broke out, clinking like cold metal hitting glass. I swallowed the bitter lump in my throat, keeping myself from trembling. No one stood up. No one objected. They let her say it as if it were normal, as if I had never existed enough to be hurt. I'm Luna, the middle child in a family where the spotlight only shines on two ends, the perfect eldest and the spoiled youngest. I arrived at the party on time, wearing an old gray shearling coat, carrying a small gift box I had wrapped myself. A silk scarf from Italy, I ordered last month because I knew she liked luxurious things. Snow clung to my coat hem as I walked into the mansion. My childhood home, now cold and unfamiliar, like a place I never truly belonged to. Guests had already gathered in the lavishly decorated living room. My mother, Evelyn, sat at the center of a red velvet sofa like a queen, dressed in a ruby-colored evening gown, her large crystal earrings sparkling under the chandelier. Beside her was my father, Walter, his face calm as if programmed not to react. My sister, Vanessa, was showing off her new manicure to Aunt Marie, while my brother, Jonah, was loudly laughing with some cousins about the new Porsche he got, rewarded with for graduation. When I stepped in, Vanessa glanced at me over her shoulder, as if I were a stain that just appeared on the white carpet. "Oh, you made it. I thought you had something going on," she said flatly, half mocking, half indifferent. I smiled softly. How could I miss Mom's big party? Mother didn't get up to greet me. She waved toward the gift table. "Put the gift over there. Then find a seat. Dinner's almost ready." No hug. No questions. No eyes lingering on me for more than a second. I quietly removed my coat and hung it up. Next to it were rows of designer fur and trench coats with glittering labels. Mine looked like something from a thrift store. I placed my small gift box next to the giant branded shopping bags, from Louis Vuitton, Dior, Saks Fifth Avenue. All shimmering and excessive. The room was bright, but cold. A chill not from weather, but from glances, from indifference. I found a seat at the far end of the table, where no one was nearby, and poured myself a small glass of wine. No one invited me. No one called me. No one saved me a seat. The old family photo that used to hang above the fireplace had been replaced with two large framed pictures, one of Vanessa at her fashion show in New York, the other of Jonah receiving the Young Entrepreneur Award at a tech conference. I wasn't there. There was no space for me. Dinner was served, elaborate and expensive. Roasted duck with plum glaze, truffle mashed potatoes, artistic salad with edible flowers, premium red wine. People talked about work, projects, awards, but no one asked how I was doing. Even Dad, the only one who used to be a support, just nodded when he saw me, then turned away, like I was a server. I tried to speak. "I just moved into a new apartment in Garden Hill, near work." Mother looked up, but not to respond. She turned to Vanessa. "Sweetheart, tell everyone about your spring collection." Just one line, sharp as a blade. I lowered my head, staring at the untouched food on my plate. I wasn't hungry. I just felt myself slowly dissolving. And then came the toasts. Dad said something generic about health. Aunt Marie congratulated the star children. Jonah joked that being a genius was exhausting. Laughter erupted. Then my mother stood. She adjusted the red silk scarf. "The gift I brought," and smiled proudly. "I'm proud of all my children," she said. "Vanessa, our shining light. Jonah, so smart and generous." She paused, glanced around, and added softly, "I'm proud of all my children. Except one." No one objected, no one said a word, just forced chuckles. Dad looked down at his plate like solving a difficult equation. Vanessa covered her mouth as if embarrassed, but I knew she was delighted. Jonah raised his glass toward me, smirking. In that moment, I didn't cry or bow my head. But inside, something broke for good. I stood frozen in the cereal aisle. A house? My grandfather left a house for me? I couldn't believe it, but something stirred inside me. I began digging, combing through every public record, tracing every tax filing, and I found it. The will of Henry Whitman naming me, Luna Hale, as the rightful heir to the old house near Willow Creek Park. But the current records listed the owners as Evelyn Hale and Walter Hale, my parents. There was a power of attorney, but it wasn't my signature. I had never signed anything. The income declarations from rental payments also appeared in the tax reports. None of that money ever came into my account. It went straight into theirs. I sat alone with that stack of documents all night, my hands trembling. I looked back on my life. Every unreciprocated help. Every effort dismissed. And now, this final inheritance, from the one person who truly loved me, stolen behind my back. I couldn't stay silent anymore. And that's when I started planning. Not for revenge, but to take back what should have been mine. Not just that house, but my voice, my existence, the right to be seen and heard. I couldn't sleep that night. Mrs. Helen's words kept echoing in my head like a choked warning bell. Heard they sold the house Mr. Henry left for you. My grandfather, Henry Whitman, was the only one who ever treated me like a real person. When I was little, he used to take me to Willow Creek Park, where we'd eat ice cream and talk about the little white house with blue trim by the lake. Someday, that'll be yours. A peaceful place, he once said, gently patting my head. I just smiled then, thinking he was telling a fairy tale. I wasn't smiling anymore. The next morning, I called the Riverford City Public Records Office. I requested a copy of the property file for 417 Willow Creek Avenue. The voice on the other end hesitated for a second before confirming, "The current owners are Evelyn Hale and Walter Hale, transferred from Henry Whitman in the year 2017. I went numb. 2017 was the year he passed away. It was also the year I graduated from college, was struggling to find a job, and still sending money home regularly. I asked, was there a power of attorney involved? The answer was yes. A document signed Luna Hale, granting full authority to Evelyn Hale over the property. I never signed any such document. I requested a full copy. Within 1 hour, I had the scanned file in hand. The signature looked like mine but was stiff, mechanical and emotionless. A digital copy. I knew, because I studied technical design, and I recognized the signs of electronic copy-paste. I didn't stop there. I accessed the public tax filing system. Then, the numbers appeared. Clear as a knife at the throat. The house had been continuously rented out since the year 2018, with an average monthly rent of $2,300. Nearly 7 years. That's more than $190,000 before taxes. All filed under my parents' names. Not a single cent reached me, no one even told me. At that time I was working 2 jobs just to afford food, while they sat back collecting income from a house that rightfully belonged to me. I printed everything. Every income line, every falsified document, every appraisal. I sat in the middle of my shabby rental apartment's living room. Papers scattered like evidence from a crime I never thought I'd be the victim of. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. Just a slow, spreading coldness inside me. I remembered clearly. In the year 2019, I asked my dad for a small loan to repair my car for work. He refused, saying he had too much debt and couldn't spare anything. I believed him. I even felt guilty for asking. Now I know. That same month they signed a new lease for the house, raising the rent to $2,450. I wasn't just deceived. I was robbed. robbed in an organized, calculated, and brutal way. They didn't just take money, they took away opportunity, the final support my grandfather left. They stole my best memory of him and turned it into a filthy mockery. I spent a night thinking, should I stay silent and disappear from the family forever? Or fight back? Then I remembered what my mother told me last year when I asked about Grandpa. His will was simple. Everything was divided equally. She looked me straight in the eye when she said it. A smooth lie. I thought about all the times I was dismissed, treated like an outsider. I thought about family parties where I was ignored, the family group chat where my messages went unanswered. And I thought about my mother's cold eyes when she said she was proud of all her children, except one. No, I wouldn't stay silent this time. I wouldn't let them bury me under the fake label of family unity. I began collecting everything. I created a digital folder with all documents. I backed it up to a hard drive and a private cloud service. I started reading about property law, forgery law, and similar lawsuits. The more I read, the more the anger inside me sharpened into clear strength. They thought I would bow down. They didn't know that the girl they abandoned year after year had learned how to stand up, and this time, I wasn't walking away quietly. I knew they would never admit what they had done, and I knew that if I stayed silent, everything would be buried forever beneath the illusion of family harmony. So I prepared. Not a loud explosion, but a precise cut. Silent, yet fatal. My mother's birthday party, Evelyn's, was held at the Amber Room, a high-end restaurant where a single meal cost a week's worth of my wages. The air was heavy with Chanel perfume, mixed with wine and smug pride. I arrived on time, like a programmed clock. Cold, precise, emotionless. My gift was a small ivory envelope, her name handwritten in delicate script. Inside was no cash, no present. Just one printed line. bit.ly/willtruth417, view now. It was a link to a folder containing all the evidence. Grandpa's original will, the forged power of attorney, property records, rental transactions, and my spreadsheet detailing over $190,000 embezzled. At the party, I sat quietly at the edge of the table like always. Vanessa talked about her photo shoot in Palm Springs. Jonah bragged that his coffee shop ad had aired on local TV. My father quietly ate, and my mother smiled as if addressing an elite crowd. I said nothing. I waited. And when the champagne was poured and everyone toasted to a happy family, I stood up. No one noticed. I calmly walked over to my mother, lifted her glass as if to toast, and slipped the small envelope into the bottom, letting it float up among the bubbles. She frowned. "What's this?" I simply smiled, gave a small nod like a toast, and walked away from the table. No words, no backward glance. I walked briskly through the large glass door, leaving behind the fake laughter and dazzling lights. The December night air was freezing but clean. Snowflakes landed gently on my hair like mist. I took a deep breath and stepped toward the parking lot, as if I had just closed a chapter, not looking back. I was unlocking my car when I heard it. A scream. High, sharp, full of panic, from inside the restaurant. I didn't have to look. I knew they had opened the envelope. I knew it had begun. I drove away, not speeding. No music, just the wind hitting the windshield, and my heart beating steady as if it had never known fear. My phone, on the passenger seat, started buzzing 10 minutes later. The first name that popped up? Vanessa. I flipped the phone face down. 5 minutes later. Jonah. Then Mom. Then Dad. Then Vanessa again. A flood of messages. Then video calls. I didn't answer. By the time I got back to my apartment, the screen was glowing white with notifications. I sat on the couch, watching it blink like a ticking bomb. I tapped one message from Mom. "Luna, what is this? Are you trying to destroy our family?" Another message from Vanessa. Are you insane? How dare you do this? I turned off my phone, said nothing. There was no sense of satisfaction inside me. Only clarity. But it didn't end there. The next morning, I woke up to 17 missed calls and more than 30 messages. Some were pleading. "Sweetheart, can we talk? I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding. Don't take things too far, Luna, we can resolve this privately." Others were threatening. "If you go public with this, we will never forgive you. Family is forever. But betrayal has a price." Then, in the afternoon, I received an email from my father. Subject: "Do not push this too far. Luna, you don't fully understand the context. There were things your grandfather said that you didn't hear. We only did what was best for the family. Don't let everything fall apart." Dad. I read every word, my eyes dry. None of them asked, "Are you okay?" No one admitted any wrongdoing. Not a single word of acknowledgement. Only control. Only panic because their power was under threat. And that only made me more certain than ever. I thought they'd stay silent for a while. I hoped, just for a moment, that maybe they'd reflect, face the truth, or at least find a respectful way to talk. But no. Evelyn Hale and the people behind her didn't apologize. They chose their usual tactic: twist the truth, and drag me through the mud. 3 days after the party, I received a message from an old college friend, Jenna. "Did you really turn down your grandfather's house because you didn't want the responsibility?" Vanessa said so on Facebook. I blinked, my heart tightening. Turned it down? I rushed to my sister's page. Her latest post included a photo of white chrysanthemums in a glass vase, with a caption that read like a fake eulogy. Sometimes, choosing a career means letting go of priceless gifts from family. I hope my sister finds peace on the path she's chosen. Grandpa would understand. Below were hundreds of sympathetic comments. "Your mom is so strong for accepting her decision. Every family has a lost child. Poor old man." I could hardly breathe. This wasn't just distortion, it was a calculated campaign, an organized effort to discredit me before I could speak the truth. I checked Twitter. Jonah had posted, "It's sad when people fabricate stories to play the hero. Greed can turn blood into enemies." I wanted to scream. But I knew better. Screaming on social media wouldn't bring justice. It would only make me look like an overreacting lunatic. While they wore the victim's mask, I'd be the one under attack. So I called the only person who could help me then. "Bennett and Associates Law Office, this is Rachel, how may I assist you?" "I need to speak with Ms. Bennett. My name is Luna Hale, I am a victim of inheritance theft, and I have proof." 2 days later, I walked into an office on the 12th floor of the Glassridge building, a high-end office tower on the west side of the city. No velvet couches, no scented candles, no decorative excess. Everything was sharp, orderly, and cold as steel. Just like Miss Bennett's way of working. Harper Bennett. Mid-40s, charcoal gray blazer, hair neatly tied. Sharp eyes that never blink when someone lies. She flipped through every document I brought. No interruptions. No expressions. When I finished, she set her pen down and said 4 words. "You have a case." I exhaled like I'd surfaced from underwater. "They're spreading false information about me," I said. "They're saying I refused the house. They're turning me into the villain." Harper tilted her head. "You have a record of it?" I nodded, opened my laptop, and showed her screenshots, posts, comments, even anonymous threatening messages I had received recently. Some accused me of making things up to grab the inheritance. Others called me a traitorous snake. One person even wrote, "If it were me, I wouldn't let it go. An ungrateful brat doesn't deserve a family." Harper skimmed through it all. "We don't yet have enough to sue for defamation, but if they keep going, I'll show them what legal consequences look like." I nodded, trying to stay composed. "So what's the next step?" "I'll send an official cease and desist letter, demanding they stop all defamatory actions. If they ignore it, we'll present evidence of a coordinated smear campaign. At that point, we can sue for both inheritance theft and defamation. She looked straight into my eyes. And from now on, do not contact them directly. All communication goes through me. You need to protect yourself both legally and emotionally. You're in a position of power now, Luna. Don't let them pull you down. For the first time in years, I felt someone was on my side. Not out of affection, not out of obligation, but for justice. That night, I received another post, this time from my mother. An old photo of me as a child sitting beside Grandpa, captioned, "Some beautiful things can't be kept when people choose to forget gratitude." I didn't comment. I didn't share. I simply forwarded it to Harper with one line. "I haven't stopped." An hour later, she replied, "Good. Let him keep going. I'm documenting every single move." And I knew, no matter how thick the fog they tried to spread, this time, I would tear through it all. I went to Harper Bennett's office for the third time in 2 weeks, carrying a fresh, thick file in my hand, blood boiling beneath my winter coat. This time, I wasn't there to ask for help. I was there to act. Mrs. Bennett greeted me with a glance sharp as a blade. "No small talk. Are you ready?" I nodded. We sat across from each other, sunlight from the large window falling across the papers spread over the table. Harper picked up each piece of evidence. The original will of Mr. Henry Whitman, kept by his private attorney. The 2017 property transfer with the forged signature. Financial reports from the tax department. A breakdown of rental income, nearly $200,000 collected from the house, that should have been mine. "With all the evidence you've provided," Harper said, "we're not just looking at a civil lawsuit to reclaim property. We have grounds for criminal prosecution. Forged signatures, inheritance fraud, abuse of power of attorney, and potentially tax evasion if necessary." I swallowed hard. Hearing the lawyer confirm it made everything more real than ever. This wasn't just emotional pain. This was legal truth. "I want to file the lawsuit," I said without hesitation. "I want to reclaim everything, the house, the rental income, and, if possible, the truth." Harper didn't smile, but her eyes narrowed slightly, as if contemplating a strategic move. "Good. But be prepared. They won't back down easily." She was right. The next day, I received the first envelope. A letter, printed on high-quality paper, with no law firm name, only the line, "We wish to resolve this internally." Enclosed was a non-disclosure agreement. In exchange, I would receive $40,000 and agree not to sue, not to disclose any documents, and not to speak to the media. I threw it in the trash without reading the rest. A day later, 2 unfamiliar men stood at my door around 10 o'clock at night. Black coats, gloves, one holding a clipboard. When I didn't open the door, one of them called out loudly, "We represent a relative of yours. You just need to sign and everything will end smoothly." I double-locked the door and immediately called Harper. "They're starting to play dirty," I said, my voice trembling. "Good," she replied. "I'm documenting every action. Do you have security cameras?" I nodded, even though she couldn't see. In the following days, letters continued to arrive, each with a different tone. Sometimes a promise to rewrite history. "If you sign here, the family will amend the inheritance, ensuring your name is on the document." Other times, a subtly threatening tone. "This battle could bring pain to the whole family. Don't let it go too far." One Friday evening, I opened an email from my father. Subject: Last chance. "Luna, you're doing the unthinkable. Your mother is devastated. Vanessa lost a contract due to public opinion. Jonah is having to sell his cafe. If you have any conscience, you'll stop. Don't become the one who destroys an entire family over a few dollars. Sign the paper, take the money and let it go." "Dad." I didn't reply. I just forwarded the email to Harper. 2 days later, we officially filed a lawsuit in the Riverford City Civil Court. The lawsuit had 3 parts. Reclaiming property ownership, demanding the return of all rental income over 6 years, and seeking compensation for financial and emotional damages. Attached were full copies of legal documents, forged evidence, and a petition for criminal prosecution, fraud, forgery, misappropriation of assets. I signed at the bottom of the complaint, my hand steady, my heart resolute. The next day, Harper sent the official notice to my parents, with copies to their family lawyer and the district attorney's office. Every word was a cut, severing the control they had tightened around me for years. No more pultaye retreat. No more excuses. This time, they couldn't deny the crime. No more hiding behind family. No more hollow apologies. And if they wanted a fight, I was ready. The courtroom that morning was cold and silent like a frozen lake. I sat in the front row, hands clasped tightly, feeling an uncanny calm. No more panic, no more trembling, just a waiting. A waiting that had lasted for years. Across the room, my mother, Evelyn, sat beside my father Walter, shoulders hunched, eyes avoiding mine. Vanessa wore a beige suit, expensive in style, but her face pale as if sleep-deprived. Jonah was busy typing messages on his phone, his attitude indifferent, as if this was just another dull company meeting. Their lawyer was a tall man in a neat black suit, hair slicked back. Ethan Grant, the Hale family's lawyer for over 2 decades. The one who once called me the quiet but obedient child. The one who signed as a witness on the forged documents. Harper Bennett entered like a cold wind. No frills, no expression, but her eyes were sharp as steel. She sat beside me, placed her hand on the thick file, then looked straight across. "We're ready." The judge was Judith Mallory, over 60 years old, white hair, voice deep and clear to every punctuation mark. After a brief opening, the trial began. Ethan Grant stood up first. He spoke a lot, painting a picture of a daughter misunderstanding her grandfather's intentions, an unfortunate misunderstanding in asset handling, and finally, a family trying to mend in love. They never mentioned the forgery. Not a word of acknowledgement. When he sat down, Harper didn't stand immediately. She just opened the file, pulled out each piece of evidence, and spoke. "Calm, Your Honor. We have the original will, kept by Attorney Whitman, certified, confirming that the house at 417 Willow Creek Avenue was transferred to his only granddaughter, Luna Hale." She placed the will on the table. "We have the forged power of attorney, with digitally copied signatures, verified by a handwriting expert." Another document was presented. "We have rental records, money transfers from tenants into the accounts of Evelyn and Walter Hale." Then the transaction ledger, clear, detailed, undeniable. The room fell silent. I glanced at the family. Vanessa biting her lip, Jonah looking down at the floor, and my mother clutching the edge of her skirt, not daring to lift her head. But the strongest blow was yet to come. Piper turned toward the door. "We call the next witness, Mrs. Mavis Burton." The door opened, and Mrs. Burton, the neighbor who had lived next to my grandfather for nearly 40 years, entered with a cane, small in stature but with bright eyes. I choked up when I saw her smile at me, gentle like the spring of years past. She sat down, swore before the court, then spoke. "Henry Whitman told me, clearly, many times, that he was leaving the house to Luna. He called it his gift to the granddaughter who always knew how to yield. I clearly remember one time, he showed me a handwritten note, saying, 'If anything happens, I don't want the girl to be pushed out onto the street.'" Ethan Grant tried to twist her words, questioning her memory, age, accuracy. But she just smiled, firm as stone. "I can forget many things, sir," she said. "But a grandfather's love for his only granddaughter is something I can never forget." The whole room went silent. When it was my turn to speak, I said only what was necessary. I recounted that I knew nothing about the house, that I once thought it had been sold, that I lived in a shabby apartment while my parents silently profited from something that wasn't theirs. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I just told the truth, as if reading a verified report. After the final arguments, Judge Mallory withdrew to deliberate. I sat waiting, my heart pounding so hard my ears rang. Harper just placed her hand on my shoulder, a silent touch, but enough to keep me from collapsing. When Judge Mallory returned, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Reviewing all documents, testimonies, and evidence, she said, her voice unwavering. The court rules. The house at 417 Willow Creek Avenue belongs to the plaintiff, Luna Hale. I felt like the air in my lungs reversed. But still, I didn't cry. The defendant must return all illegally obtained rental income from the past 6 years, totaling $198,400, plus accrued interest. Attorney fees shall be covered by the defendant. The court also acknowledges the act of document forgery and will forward the file to the district attorney's office for criminal prosecution review. Harper turned to me and gave a small nod. I didn't look toward my parents or my siblings. They were no longer the center of this story. I only looked up at the justice relief hanging above the judge's bench. The first time it truly meant something. 2 weeks after the verdict was issued, I received a call from Harper near midnight. "Luna," she said, "the prosecutor's office just announced. Walter Hale will be prosecuted on 3 criminal charges: document forgery, misappropriation of assets, and inheritance fraud." I froze for a few seconds. My father, the man who always sat silently at dinner, the one who taught me how to ride a bike, was now being investigated as a deliberate criminal. But I didn't feel pain. Only the sharp clarity that justice had finally caught up with the truth. Not long after the news spread, my mother, Edelyn, was forced to resign from the community library when a local newspaper ran a headline titled, "Mother Accused of Stealing Daughter's Inheritance." The article showed her leaving court, head down, hair disheveled, coat wrinkled, a far cry from the powerful, elegant woman I once knew. My sister, Vanessa, lost her promotion contracts with 2 major brands. Partners simultaneously released statements pausing cooperation due to unresolved legal issues. Jonah disappeared from social media after his university announced the revocation of his scholarship, citing funding from a non-transparent family trust. No one paid Jonah's tuition for the next semester. My family didn't fall apart, they fractured piece by piece, under the weight of the secrets they had buried for too long. I moved into the house on Willow Creek on a crisp early spring morning. Gentle sunlight, cool breeze, the oak tree out front beginning to bud. As I slid the key into the lock and pushed the wooden door open, I stood silently for several minutes. I didn't cry. I didn't beam with joy. I just stepped inside, calmly and rightly, as if I had finally come home. I unpacked each box, arranged every corner. I cleaned the windowsills by hand, changed the curtains, removed the old hooks my family had used when they secretly rented this place out. I kept nothing they left behind. Everything was cleared, so I could start over, free of burdens and ghosts. A month later, Christina, the only friend who never left me during the storm, arrived with a slightly burnt peach cobbler and a bouquet of lavender. "We should celebrate," she said, "because you finally have a place that truly belongs to you." I laughed. After so many months, it wasn't forced. It came out as naturally as breath. Michael came too. He didn't ask about the trial, didn't mention my parents. He simply stood quietly by the empty wall and gently asked, "Would you like to hang a picture here?" I nodded. And so we hung the old photo, me at 12 years old, grinning with my grandfather in the backyard. Slightly blurry, edges torn. But I had never seen a photo more beautiful. Every weekend, the house filled with conversation, the smell of baking, barking dogs and old music playing from a Bluetooth speaker. No one looked at me with pity. No one tried to mold me into some ideal. I was no longer the easy child, meaning invisible. I was no longer a shadow beside the 2 golden children. I was Luna Hale, the one who stood up, who fought and who reclaimed her own voice. One evening as I sat on the front porch steps, I received an email from Harper. Subject: Closure. Luna. The prosecutor's office confirms the investigation is complete. Walter Hale will go to trial next quarter. We do not have to appear unless we wish. On the financial side, the compensation has been fully transferred. You did something most people never dare. And you won. Affair. I sat there for a long time, watching the streetlights reflect in the glass, then looked down at my hands. The same hands that once trembled from being forgotten. Now they were steady, steering the course of my life. I did not forgive them. I didn't need to, in order to live better. I just needed to live, in my own way, among people who never required me to ask permission to exist. Una's story is a chilling reminder that sometimes, those who hurt us the most are the ones who call themselves family. But truth has a quiet power. When we dare to face it and demand justice, we don't just reclaim property, we reclaim ourselves. Luna is no longer the forgotten child. She became a symbol of resilience, of choosing to live a life rooted in self-worth, even if it means walking through betrayal by blood.